Bullies humiliated a blind veteran until a Navy SEAL and his German shepherd stood up. The sound of a white cane tapping against cracked sidewalk is the only warning a blind man ever gets. Caleb Holt heard it before he felt it. He was 3 steps from the door of the post office in a small Tennessee town called Briar Hollow when a hand slammed into his shoulder and spun him sideways. A voice he did not know said the words that were going to change his day. They said his dog should be put down for biting, and it had not bitten. They said he should learn his place, and he never had. And then they laughed, the way small men laugh when they think they have been given permission. His dog pressed against his leg. Scout was a yellow Labrador, 12 years old, half blind in one eye from the same blast that had taken his sight in Afghanistan in the spring of 2011. They were the same wound walking around in 2 different bodies. They had walked this same sidewalk 1,000 times, and every single time this dog had been his eyes. Bullies humiliated a blind veteran that morning, and the sidewalk did not stop them. The hand on his shoulder belonged to a man named Randy Kellick. Randy was 34, soft around the middle, loud around the mouth. He had grown up 2 streets from Caleb's house and had spent every one of his adult years pretending the veteran was not real. Randy wore a clean white shirt that morning because he had a meeting later, but right now he had decided the post office sidewalk was the place Caleb would learn something. 2 men stood slightly behind him. One laughed when Caleb stumbled. The other kept his hands in his pockets and looked at the ground. Randy said there was a piece of paper inside the post office Caleb had to sign. The paper would give up the acre at the back of Caleb's property. The paper would not pay anything. Randy said there would be trouble if Caleb didn't sign it. Randy said the word trouble with a smile on his face, the way a man does when he is sure no one will stop him. Caleb asked who wanted the land. Randy said it did not matter. Caleb asked why they would not send a lawyer. Randy said lawyers were for rich men. Caleb asked to be left alone. Randy said he would think about that. Then Randy reached down and grabbed Scout by the collar. Caleb felt the leash go tight. He heard Scout give a low, broken growl. He heard his own breath catch. He said very quietly that they had no right to touch his dog. Randy said very quietly back that they had every right. That was the moment the door to the post office opened. That was the moment a man none of the 3 had ever noticed before stepped out onto the sidewalk with a clipboard in his hand. His name was Brett Phelan. He was 56, lean, quiet, with short gray hair and a thin scar that ran along the line of his jaw. He had been living in Briar Hollow for less than 2 months. No one in town knew him. He paid cash at the market. He asked for no mail. He walked his German shepherd at the same hour every morning on the same route, and he tipped the waitress at the diner where he ate alone even though the waitress had told him he did not have to. The German shepherd's name was Ranger. He was 7 years old, 88 pounds, and the most still animal anyone in Briar Hollow had ever seen. He had been bred and trained and then carefully retired by a man who had spent 30 years in a kind of work he did not talk about. Ranger did not bark at squirrels. Ranger did not lunge at bicycles. He moved like a piece of furniture that happened to breathe. When Brett came out the post office door that morning, Ranger was on his left in a soft leather harness. Ranger saw Randy. Ranger saw the 2 men behind Randy. Ranger saw Caleb on the sidewalk. Ranger saw the hand on Scout's collar. Ranger stopped walking. Brett kept his hands at his sides. He did not tell Caleb to do anything. He did not tell Randy to do anything. He just stood 3 feet from the door and let Ranger look. The silence lasted 6 seconds. Randy felt it and did not yet understand what he was feeling. The 2 men behind Randy felt it and took half a step back. Caleb felt it and put his hand down on Scout's head. It was Ranger who broke the silence, and not with a growl and not with a bark. Ranger stepped forward 1 pace, low and balanced, his weight dropping half an inch into his haunches, and set his muzzle within an inch of Randy's free hand. He did not touch Randy's skin. He breathed on it. Randy let go of Scout. Randy let go because his hand had begun to sweat and his spine had begun to remember something his mind had not yet named. He did not understand what he was looking at. He only understood that he had been seen. He stepped back 1 step. He pulled his shoulders in. He told his 2 friends to get in the truck. They got in the truck. Randy, before he turned, said that Caleb should not think this was over. He said there would be a different sidewalk and a different morning, and that the man with the German shepherd would not be there every time. He said it with the smile back on his face, because that was the only way he knew how to feel like a man. Brett did not reply. He picked up his clipboard. He turned to Caleb. He said very quietly that Caleb had somewhere to be. Caleb nodded. Caleb said thank you, even though he could not see Brett's face. Scout, as Brett passed, pressed her side against his calf for half a second, and Brett felt it, and he said nothing. Caleb walked 2 blocks east, the way he walked every day, until his cane found the edge of a curb he knew by heart. He turned left, 3 paces past the curb, into the door of Millie's diner. The bell above the door rang twice, the way it always rang for him. Millie, behind the counter, looked up. Millie had been the owner of the diner for 19 years. She had been a school teacher before that and a nurse before that. She had a way of holding her face still when something hurt her. Millie said his name. Millie always said his name. She said, "Caleb, honey, sit in your booth. I will bring coffee." Caleb sat in his booth, which was the second one from the window on the north wall. Scout lay down at his feet. Scout sighed the way old dogs do when they have walked farther than anyone else thinks they have. The diner had 6 other people in it that morning. There was a woman named Trudy reading a paperback. There was an older man named Arnold who had been a postal worker for 31 years and who nodded at Caleb once before going back to his eggs. There was a teenage girl working on a laptop. There was a couple holding hands across a table. There was a truck driver eating quickly because his shift had begun 20 minutes earlier. None of these people had seen what had just happened outside the post office. None of them would have stopped it if they had. Caleb did not tell Millie what had happened. Millie did not ask. They had a quiet agreement in this diner. The agreement was that Millie would never pry and Caleb would never be pitied, and they would both pretend that this town was still the quiet place it had been when Caleb's mother had first brought him to it as a boy. 20 minutes later, Brett came in. The bell rang twice. He sat in the booth at the back of the room with his back to the corner. Ranger lay down beside the booth, his head along his paws, his eyes half open. Millie brought coffee without being asked. She set the cup at the edge of the table the way she had learned to set things for Brett because Brett did not like hands coming too close. Brett said thank you. Ranger did not move. Caleb did not know that Brett was in the diner. Caleb could not see him. Caleb heard only the bell, only the hum of the customer behind him, only the soft click of a pen. Millie, walking back behind the counter, paused at Caleb's booth and put her hand on his shoulder for 1 second. She did not say anything. She did not have to. Caleb knew what the hand on the shoulder meant. It meant that something was coming back his way that morning, something he had not asked for. Something that would not feel like mercy because it would not feel soft. It would feel like a wall. 40 minutes after Caleb had come into the diner, the bell above the door rang twice again. This time it was Randy. Randy had 3 men with him this time. One of them was the deputy sheriff of Briar Hollow, whose name was Colburn. Colburn had been sheriff for 9 years. Colburn had been offered some of the same land. Colburn's wife drove a new truck that had not been there a year ago. Colburn kept his hand very close to his holster that morning. The way a man does when reaching for it would make him feel like a man. Randy smiled when he saw Caleb. He said, "Caleb." He said the name like it was a small animal he had cornered. He said, "Did you think about the paper?" Caleb said he had. Caleb said he was not going to sign it. That was when Randy hit him. It was not a hard hit. It was an open hand sideways on the side of Caleb's face. It knocked him sideways in the booth. His coffee spilled across the table. His cane rolled to the floor and slid under the next booth. Scout jumped up at the sound and sat back down because Caleb's hand came out, palm flat, the way he had taught her to settle when there was danger. Scout obeyed her old master even though every part of her wanted to rise up. Millie made a small sound. Trudy looked up from her paperback for 1 second. Arnold looked up from his eggs and then looked back down. The teenage girl closed her laptop. The couple let go of each other's hands. The truck driver put his fork down. Nobody said anything. Nobody stood up. Randy said, "Sign the paper, Caleb." Randy said it the way he had been planning to say it all morning in front of everyone because he wanted everyone to understand that this was his town and that Caleb was not part of it. Colburn stood behind him. Colburn watched. Colburn did not put his hand on Randy's arm. Colburn did not say a word. Caleb put his hand to the side of his face. He felt where the slap had landed. He felt where the blood had already started to move under the skin. He did not cry. He did not beg. He said quietly that they were going to regret this. Randy laughed. He said, "Who is going to make us regret it, Caleb?" He said, "Your blind dog." He said the same blind dog they ought to put down. That was when Brett stood up. He did it slowly. He did it like a man who had no hurry in him. He set his coffee cup down with 2 hands because cups are to be respected even in moments like this. He closed the small black notebook he had been writing in. He stood. He straightened his jacket at the shoulders. Ranger rose with him, the way one body rises. Randy looked over. He did not recognize Brett. Randy saw an older man in a flannel shirt with gray hair and a dog on a leash. Randy said, "Sit down, old man, this does not concern you." Randy said it with the smile still on his face. Brett did not sit. Brett did not look at Randy. Brett looked at Colburn. Brett said, very quietly, "Deputy." Brett said one sentence to Colburn, and the sentence was that Colburn was being recorded. He did not raise his voice. He did not threaten. He stated it because that is what men like Brett do, they state facts. Colburn's face changed. Colburn looked down at his hand near his holster. Colburn decided not to put his hand on his holster. Randy said, "What is this old man talking about?" Randy stepped toward Brett. Ranger stepped forward one pace, the same slow, low movement he had made on the sidewalk, and placed his muzzle within an inch of Randy's hand again. Randy stopped walking. Randy felt the spine thing again and still did not have a name for it. Brett said, "The diner has a security camera over the register." He said, "The camera is owned by a small LLC that I have been paid to consult for since I moved to town." He said, "The camera records audio and video in high definition and uploads the footage to an off-site server every 60 seconds. He said, "Deputy, you should be aware of that." Colburn said nothing for a long moment. Then he reached into his shirt pocket. He took out his phone. He unlocked it. He did something with it that no one could see. He cleared his throat. He said that he had to step outside for a minute. He said it like a man who had remembered an errand. Randy watched Colburn go. Randy did not understand yet. The two men with him watched Colburn go. They understood faster than Randy did. They had wives. They had jobs. They had small parts of their lives they were trying not to lose. They walked out the door without saying a word. Randy stood alone in the diner. He had not been alone since he walked in. He stood there with two older men in the room, three women, a teenager, a truck driver, and a German shepherd who had not yet decided to do anything but breathe. Randy said, "Caleb is going to sign that paper." Brett said, "No, he is not." Brett said those three words the way you state the temperature of a room. Randy said, "What are you going to do about it, old man?" Brett said, "I am not going to do anything." He said, "I have already done something." He said, 3 minutes ago, while you were hitting a blind man in the face in front of 9 witnesses, I made a phone call to the office of the Inspector General at the Department of the Navy." He said, "That office is now aware of Deputy Colburn, of you, of the paper you were trying to get Caleb to sign, and of the way land has been quietly moved through false paperwork in this county for the last 18 months. He said, "The Inspector General is on her way." Randy said, "You do not know anyone at the Navy." Brett said, "I served in the Navy for 26 years. He said, "The last 4 of those years were as a master chief in the SEAL teams." He said, "I still have a friend who serves as a senior administrator in the office that handles misconduct aimed at military personnel." He said, "My friend answered on the second ring because that is the kind of man he is." He said, "My friend asked me to describe what I had just watched." He said, "I described it." He said, "My friend said 3 words to me." He said, "My friend said, 'Stay on the line.'" The room went very quiet. The truck driver had put his fork down. The teenage girl had closed her laptop again. Trudy had her hand over her mouth. Arnold was looking at his eggs and trying to keep his hands from shaking because he had voted for Colburn twice and had once believed Colburn was a decent man. Millie was leaning against the counter with her arms folded and a look on her face that no one in Briar Hollow had ever seen on her before. The look of a woman who had finally been given the help she could not give herself. Randy took a step back. He said, "This is fake." He said, "You are not any SEAL." He said, "You set this whole thing up." He pointed at the camera. He pointed at Caleb. He pointed at the old radio behind the counter. He said, "None of this is real." He said, "You are not real." Brett said, "I am real." He said, "So is the camera." He said, "So is the audio recording of you hitting a man who keeps a Purple Heart in his sock drawer and has never told this town that he earned it." He said, "You are going to be arrested." He said, "Not by Colburn." He said, "By federal agents." Brett sat down. He picked up his coffee. He took a sip. The coffee was still warm because it had only been a few minutes. Ranger sat back down beside the booth. Ranger laid his head along his paws. Ranger closed his eyes the way a soldier closes his eyes when the room finally has the shape he wanted it to have. Caleb sat in his booth on the other side of the diner with his hand still on the side of his face. Caleb did not say anything. Caleb did not need to. He had heard enough. He had understood enough. He had understood that the man with the German shepherd was not a customer and was not a stranger passing through. He had understood that the man had been coming to this diner at the same time every morning for weeks, paying cash, tipping when he did not have to, opening and closing his small black notebook the way other men pray. Because he was a man who had learned somewhere that small habits are the only thing you get to keep when everything else has been taken. Caleb had understood the sound of Ranger's breath. He had understood it because Scout made the same sound at his side every night for 12 years. Scout and Ranger were different breeds and different colors, but they were cousins in the same brotherhood of dogs who had been asked to do too much in their lives and who had done it anyway. Caleb put his hand down to the floor. Scout pushed her nose into his palm. Caleb scratched behind her left ear, the way he always did when she had been brave. Caleb said thank you to her under his breath so only she could hear it. Scout pressed her side against his leg under the table. The leg of the table and Caleb's leg and Scout's side together made a small fort of warmth, the way small forts of warmth always are made when a wounded man and an old dog decide to live through another morning. 22 minutes later, 2 cars pulled up outside the diner. The cars were plain. The cars were dark blue. The cars did not have lights on top. The doors opened. 4 people stepped out. 2 were women. All 4 of them wore the kind of jacket that does not have a label on the outside, but has a label on the inside that names a federal agency that almost no one outside of Washington has ever heard of. They came into the diner. The bell rang twice. They did not look at Millie. They did not look at Trudy. They did not look at Arnold. They did not look at the couple. They did not look at the truck driver. They did not look at the teenage girl. They walked across the diner with their eyes on Randy. They stopped 1 pace away from where Randy was still standing, because Randy had not moved, because the room had frozen him in place like a fly in amber, because Randy had watched Brett drink his coffee and had not known what to do with his hands. One of the agents, a woman with short gray hair and a voice that did not raise, told Randy he was under arrest. She told him the charges. She told him the charges included witness tampering, attempted coercion of a disabled veteran, conspiracy to commit fraud against the United States, and obstruction. She told him the paper he had been asking Caleb to sign was part of a fraud against 2 federal programs run through the Department of Veterans Affairs. She told him the paper had been used in 11 earlier transactions in this county, that some of those transactions had involved older veterans, that some of those veterans had been blind like Caleb, and that 6 of those veterans had signed under threat. She told him his rights in clear signed language. She handed him the card. Randy tried to say something. The words came out sideways. He tried to make his voice sound the way it had sounded all morning. The voice did not work. He was, for the first time in a long time, a small man in a diner being told to put his hands behind his back. He put his hands behind his back. The second agent, a younger man with kind eyes, walked over to Caleb's booth. He asked Caleb's permission to sit. Caleb said yes. The agent sat. He asked Caleb to tell him slowly every detail of every threat against him in the past 3 months. He did not write anything down. He looked at Caleb's face the way a man looks at a face when he wants to remember it forever. He said that the federal government was sorry. He said, do not say it back to me. He said, just sit here for a minute. Millie brought the agent a coffee without being asked. A third agent, a tall woman with red hair, walked over to Brett's booth. She thanked him. She did not shake his hand. She had been trained better than that. She pulled a chair up quietly. She sat down. She asked him how long he had been watching. Brett said 4 days. She asked if he had been waiting for something specific. Brett said yes. He said, I was waiting for someone to touch the dog. He said, when a man grabs a service animal by the collar, that is the line I have to see crossed before I can do what I was sent here to do. She asked him what he had been sent there to do. Brett said watching. He said mostly watching. He said, but I was also asked to call if the paper started to move. She asked him who had asked him. He said, my friend in the office. She asked him if his friend knew about the camera. He said yes. He said, the camera was put in by an LLC that the office contracted with in 19 other towns this year. He said, the LLC is a small operation. He said, the man who runs it lost a friend to a similar scam in Ohio when he was 24 years old, and he has spent the last decade of his life setting up cameras in small diners in small towns that share a certain pattern with the one in Ohio. She asked him who that friend was. Brett said, my brother. She looked at him for a long time. She looked at his gray hair. She looked at the scar along his jaw. She looked at his hands. She looked at Ranger. She looked back at him. She said, I am sorry about your brother. She said, your brother would be proud of this diner. She said this diner is going to save a lot of veterans. Brett nodded. He picked up his coffee. He took a sip. He looked across the room at the small window by the front door where morning light was coming through and hitting one corner of the empty table at the front of the diner. Colburn was outside. Colburn had not come back in. From the parking lot, he had called his wife. He had told her to keep the new truck for one more day. He had told her to keep the new house for one more day. He had told her he had made a mistake. She had asked what mistake. He had said all of them. She had said she would think about it. The fourth agent walked Colburn back in through the back door of the diner. Colburn looked smaller than he had looked on the sidewalk. The fourth agent led Colburn past Caleb's booth. Colburn walked past Caleb without speaking. The fourth agent led Colburn past Brett's booth. Colburn tried not to look at Brett. Colburn looked. Colburn looked the way a man looks when the boat has tipped, and he is still inside it, but the water is already in his shoes. He did not understand yet what had just happened to him. He did not understand the part of his name that was now in a federal file. He did not understand the part of his deputy's salary that was now under review, or the part of his new truck that was now on a list, or the part of his wife's name that was now on a list of names. He did not yet understand the way a life can be checked quickly, the way an old life is checked when the old life has been cheating for a long time. The fourth agent took Colburn out the front door. The bell rang twice. The diner went quiet again. Randy was still in his chair. The first agent was standing over him. The second agent was at Caleb's booth. The third agent was at Brett's booth. Randy watched his own hands in front of him. He watched the way the cuffs caught the light from the front window. He did not try to talk his way out. He tried once when the agent was telling him his rights for the second time. He tried once when the agent was buckling the cuffs. He tried once when the agent was leading him out of the diner. He tried once more when his feet crossed the threshold. Randy said, "This is not right." He said, "You should be looking at the old man with the dog." He said he had no right to be there. He said he set this whole thing up. The agent told him calmly that the man with the dog had been cleared by federal review. She told him his name was on 11 warrants. She told him he was going to federal holding in less than an hour. She told him, "Please stop talking now." Randy stopped talking. The bell above the door rang twice. The diner was empty of federal agents. The bell would ring 4 more times that morning. Once for a man from the post office coming to apologize to Millie about the noise the federal car had made in his parking lot. Once for a woman who had been watching from across the street and who brought in a pie because Millie had once been kind to her daughter. Once for the postmaster himself, who brought in a small American flag for Caleb because the post office had been meaning to do it for a year. And once for a young man carrying a cardboard box, who handed the box to Millie with both hands, and who said the box was for Caleb, and who said the box had come from the office of the Inspector General, and who said someone named Brett had asked them to send it. Millie opened the box. Inside the box was a replacement harness for Scout. Inside the box was a small leather lead with a brass clasp. Inside the box was a letter that said, in plain language, that Scout had been retired from federal service. See, and that her new status was family. The letter said that the office would, from now on, send Caleb a small monthly check for the lifetime of the dog, and for the lifetime of Caleb. The letter said that the office understood Caleb had never asked for help, and that the office was sorry it had not offered it sooner. Caleb held the harness in his hand. He passed his thumb across the brass clasp. He asked Millie to read the letter aloud slowly so he could hear every word of it. Millie read it. Millie's voice broke at one part. Millie did not stop reading. When Millie was finished, she folded the letter and put it back in the box and set the box down in front of Caleb. Caleb put his right hand on Scout's head. Caleb said out loud to no one in particular that he was sorry this had to happen this way. Caleb said that he wished he had been enough of a man to handle it on his own. Caleb said that he wished his dog had not been touched. Caleb said that he wished the diner had not had to see it. Caleb said that he was sorry. Brett, from his booth on the south wall of the diner, said quietly, "You have been enough." He said, "What happened this morning happened because the men who did it are what they are and not because you are what you are not." He said, "Your dog has been enough." He said, "This diner has been enough." He said, "This town has been enough." He said, "Do not apologize." Ranger on the floor beside Brett's booth lifted his head. Ranger dropped his head again. Ranger pressed his muzzle gently against Caleb's cane, which was still on the floor under the next table. Ranger nudged the cane back toward Caleb's feet. Caleb found the cane with his hand. Caleb found Ranger's muzzle with the cane. Caleb held still for a second. Caleb said, "Thank you, dog." Scout gave a soft, broken growl, the kind that means hello from an old dog who has decided that this other dog is now part of her pack. Ranger gave one back. The two growls were different the way two old soldiers. Voices are different when they meet for the first time in a hospital cafeteria in a country neither of them grew up in. The diner settled down. Millie cleared the table that Randy had been at. Millie wiped it 4 times. Millie did not know why she was wiping it 4 times. She had a feeling that if she wiped it 4 times, the whole morning would feel wiped too. The truck driver left a 20 on the table and did not say a word. Trudy went back to her paperback. Arnold went back to his eggs, but he was smiling now. The couple held hands again. The teenage girl opened her laptop. The bell above the door rang twice for the man from the post office bringing the flag, and twice for the woman with the pie, and twice for the young man with the cardboard box. The diner had its own sound again. Brett wrote another line in his small black notebook. He wrote the words it held. He closed the notebook. He put it in his inside jacket pocket. He finished his coffee. He stood. He put a 20 on the table. He thanked Millie. Ranger stood with him. They walked to the door. The bell rang twice. They stepped out into the morning. The street outside was quiet. The post office had put up a small American flag over its door. The diner had a fresh pie on the counter that the woman with the pie had left. The truck was gone. The agents were gone. Colburn was gone. The sidewalk where Caleb had been tripped was empty. Brett walked Ranger 3 blocks north. They stopped at the small park on Poplar Street by the gazebo. He sat on the bench. He let Ranger off the leash. Ranger walked to the edge of the pond, drank water, walked back. Ranger lay down in the grass at Brett's feet. Brett scratched behind Ranger's left ear. Brett said out loud a word he had not said in 26 years. He said, brother. He said it for his brother. He said it for Caleb. He said it for Scout. He said it for the small pie on the counter. He said it for the small diner in a small town that had been quietly fighting a quiet fight since 2011 and had finally been given a hand. Across town, Caleb walked home with Scout on his left and his cane in his right hand. He carried the cardboard box under his arm. He walked slower than he used to because his dog walked slower than she used to and because they had decided to walk at each other's pace for the rest of their lives. Caleb passed the post office. Caleb passed the postmaster. The postmaster called his name. Caleb said good morning. Caleb passed the corner where Randy had grabbed Scout's collar that morning. Caleb did not stop there. Caleb did not slow. Caleb's house was a small white house with green shutters and a porch that needed paint. The front yard had a mailbox at the curb. The mailbox that morning had a small card in it. The card was from a woman in Nebraska who had once been a stranger on a phone line for veterans and who had somehow learned about Caleb that morning and who had sent him a card that said in handwriting that she was proud of him. Caleb took the card out of the mailbox. Caleb put it in his shirt pocket. He walked up the 4 steps to his porch. Scout climbed them with him. They stepped into the kitchen. The kitchen smelled of old bread. The kitchen smelled of soap. The kitchen smelled of the kind of life that has been lived carefully for a long time by a man who had nothing left to prove. Scout went to her bed in the corner. Scout turned 3 times the way dogs do. Scout lay down. Scout let her eyes close. Caleb put his hand on her back. Caleb sat on his stool at the kitchen counter. Caleb opened the cardboard box. Caleb took out the harness. Caleb took out the brass clasp. Caleb took out the letter. Caleb read the letter again under his fingers. Caleb held the brass clasp in his palm. Caleb said quietly that he had not known that strangers could do this for you. Caleb said quietly that he had thought strangers could only take things from you. Caleb said quietly that he had been wrong for a long time. Caleb said softly the word Scout. Scout opened one eye. Scout closed it. Scout was asleep. That afternoon, in a holding cell in a federal building 1 county over, Randy sat on a metal bench. Randy did not have a card from anyone. Randy did not have a box. Randy had not yet been able to call his wife, because his 1 phone call had been spent trying to reach a lawyer who had already returned the retainer Randy's wife had sent 6 months earlier. The lawyer had done this by 2 in the afternoon. The sheriff's deputy in the federal building, who was not Colburn, had told Randy calmly to think very carefully about what he said. Randy thought about what he had said that morning. Randy thought about the slap. Randy thought about the sound of Caleb's coffee spilling. Randy thought about Ranger's muzzle near his hand. Randy thought about the way he had felt when Brett closed the small black notebook and stood up. Randy thought about the sound of the bell above the diner door. Randy thought about Arnold's face. Randy thought about the 4 agents in their plain jackets. Randy thought about the brass clasp in the box he had never seen. Randy did not yet think that he deserved what was happening to him. Randy did not yet have the thought somewhere in him that would change the way he saw his own life. Randy was at that moment still the kind of man who would have done it again. He would need many slow mornings in a metal room under bright fluorescent lights before that thought would arrive, and even then it would arrive in pieces. In the diner, after the lunch rush, Millie sat at the counter and poured herself a cup of coffee from the pot she had been keeping warm for hours. She did this only when the diner was empty, only when no one could see her let her shoulders fall, only when she could let herself shake a little at the wrists, the way a person shakes when they have been holding something in for a long time and have finally been allowed to set it down. Millie set the cup down. Millie thought about Caleb's mother, who had first brought him to this diner when he was 6. Millie thought about Caleb when he was 6. Millie thought about Caleb when he was 19 before the war, when he had been the only boy in town who could lift the heavy sacks of flour without help. Millie thought about Caleb when he was 23, when he came home with the cane in one hand and the dog at his side. Millie thought about the first time he had walked into her diner after he came home, and how she had not known what to say, and how she had said only, "Sit in your booth, I will bring coffee." Millie thought about how she had said almost the same words almost every morning since. Millie thought about how a small set of words becomes a life's ritual when the person on the other end of them understands exactly what they mean. Millie wiped the counter. Millie wiped the counter only twice this time. She did not need to wipe it 4 times. In a parked car 2 streets over from Caleb's house, Brett sat. He did not get out of the car. He did not think he had the right to walk up to Caleb's door because some doors are not yours to walk up to. Some doors you watch from 2 streets over until the light in the kitchen window tells you the man inside is safe. Then you drive away. Brett put his hand on Ranger's back. Ranger was in the back seat lying on a blanket. Ranger lifted his head. Ranger put his head back down. Brett watched the kitchen window. The light came on. The light stayed on. Brett pulled out of his spot. He turned the corner. He drove out of Briar Hollow. He would be back. He said nothing. He just drove away. That night, Caleb sat in his chair by the window. He had a cup of coffee on the small table beside him, even though his doctor had told him for years that he should not drink it after 5. Caleb drank it after 5. Caleb had earned that. Scout lay at his feet. Scout's tail twitched once. Scout was somewhere in a dream that smelled of green. Fields and her master's voice. Caleb reached down. He scratched behind her left ear. He said, "Who is a good girl?" He said, "Who is my girl?" He said the same words he had said every night since she came home. Scout's tail twitched again. The front porch light was on. The brass clasp sat on Caleb's dresser upstairs. The card from the woman in Nebraska sat on the kitchen counter. The letter from the office of the Inspector General sat folded inside the cardboard box because Caleb had decided that the box itself was the right home for the letter. Caleb thought about the morning. Caleb thought about the cane in his hand. Caleb thought about Scout's growl. Caleb thought about Ranger's muzzle. Caleb thought about the bell above Millie's door. Caleb thought about Randy's hand on his face and what he had felt under the skin afterward. Caleb thought about the agents coming into the diner with their plain jackets. Caleb thought about the way Arnold had smiled at his eggs. Caleb thought about the way the postmaster had called his name across the street. Caleb thought about Brett. Caleb thought about a man he had never seen and might never see again unless Brett decided to come back. And even though Caleb did not know Brett's name yet, Caleb understood who Brett was. Caleb understood that some people walk into your life and walk out the same day, and that they leave a dent in the wall that does not decay, and that the dent is shaped like them for the rest of your days. Caleb thought about Scout smelling Ranger at the diner. Caleb thought about how Scout had decided, without making a sound, that her pack was now larger than it had been that morning. Caleb thought with a small smile that the town had been given a hand. Caleb scratched Scout's head one more time. Caleb said, "Who is a good girl?" Caleb said, "We made it, girl." Caleb said, "We made it." The kitchen light clicked off. The porch light stayed on for a while. The night came softly down on Briar Hollow. The streetlights turned on one by one, the way they always do in small towns, the way they had turned on when Caleb was 6, and his mother had first brought him to Millie's door, the way they would turn on tomorrow night, and the night after that, and every night after, for as long as the town remembered how to take care of its own. The porch light at Caleb's house would stay on. It would be on when Scout woke up and walked to the window. It would be on when she sniffed the air. It would be on when she walked back to Caleb's chair. It would be on when he put his hand down on her head. The porch light was on. It was just a porch light, but it was on.